Okay, Stitch, you're looking pretty good there, buddy. All right. Oh, hey everyone, and welcome to Groove Builders, the show where we create together. I'm your host, Disorderly Cone, and in this week's episode, we're going back into the Star Wars universe to build a Rebel Snowspeeder from our friends over at Metal Earth. Groovers, let's get down to the workbench and take a look at the package. Groove Builders, welcome to the workbench. We have our Star Wars Snowspeeder in some pretty cool Force Awakens packaging. Now, if you're building along at home with me, your package might look a little bit different, and if it does, don't worry. The instructions and the metal inside are exactly the same. Let's go ahead and take a look at the back. On the back, we have that Star Wars logo, followed by our package contents. On the right-hand side here, we have our Snowspeeder, followed by a look at our metal. Now, just below that, we have some instructions on how to build our model, but we're going to go into more detail about that during our build. On the left here, we have a QR code that we can scan to get a 360 view of our model if we need it while we're building. And at the very bottom, we get a look at the other models in this series. Now, Groovers, we've already built the Imperial Shuttle, and now with the Snowspeeder, we only need to build the Slave 1 and the ATST to be done this series. That's pretty cool, Groovers. Let's go ahead and open up our package. We have our instructions. Oh, 2 pages. And we have our metal. Look at that. That looks pretty neat. All right, Groovers, let's get building. Holding our Star Wars Metal Earth metal in hand, can you guys believe that this is our 9th Star Wars build? Pretty cool, right? I mean, we've got quite a little fleet coming along here, and the Snowspeeder is definitely a welcome addition to the family. Now, show of hands, who saw last week's episode? Quite a few of you. That's pretty good. Well, last week we built Microworld's Hall of Heavenly Purity's throne room, and the metal with that model was pretty interesting, not just because of all the color, but because of the laser etching. Yes, it looked really nice, but because of all the laser etching, it was actually hard to form our pieces into their proper shapes, oftentimes being misformed and having to be reshaped back into the shape you need. The great thing about Metal Earth is that all of their kits typically come with some really nice, easy to shape metal. That being said, laser etching does tend to add a little layer of difficulty when forming some of the more detailed pieces. Isn't that right, R2? Well, okay, R2, but I think you're a little bit biased there, buddy. Well, alright, but with all that being said, R2, do you have our instructions all ready to go? Great! Let's show our Groove Builders what we're getting ourselves into. That looks excellent, R2, and you're using the newest instructions. For all those Groove Builders following at home, you guys might have a little bit different packaging, and that's because this package is a little bit older. Now, the instructions inside might look a little bit different, but for the most part, they are the same. So I'm going to go ahead and use this version of instructions because they're most likely the ones you're going to have at home. Starting at the top, we have our Star Wars and Metal Earth logos. Then just below that, we have a nice depiction of our Snowspeeder. Next, we have a QR code that we can scan to get a 360 view of our model if we need it while we're building. This can come in handy when shaping some of our detail pieces. Below our QR code and to the left, we have a very interesting picture of a part. This is where the instructions show us the tabs, the insertion holes, and the fold lines. Now, this is a very important picture to understand because this is the fundamentals of metal model building. Now, Groovers, if this is your first build, I recommend taking this extremely slow. This model is not easy, and you will struggle a little bit forming some of these pieces. To the right, we have our legend, and this is where we find all of the icons that are scattered throughout our instructions. The first icon we see is the engraved side. When we see this icon, we need to make sure that our detail is facing up. Now, when we see the non-engraved sign just below that one, you need to make sure that the non-engraved side is exposed to where you're building. Just below that, we have a detention point. Now, you won't see this very often, but when you do see this particular sign, you need to pay extra close attention to what you're doing. This might be because the parts are a little bit difficult to form, or they might break if you're not being careful. Just below our attention point, we have the almighty circles and triangles. Every single time we see the circles, we want to take as much of the tab in our tweezers as possible and then bend them over 90 degrees. When we see the triangles, we want to take as much of the tab in our tweezers as possible and then twist them 90 degrees. Now groovers, I always recommend following the instructions when it comes to building and using these tab recommendations. At the end, when everything is done, you can always go over your model, and if you see any tabs that you might think may look better twisted or maybe bent over, do it then. That way you don't run the risk of breaking any pieces or possibly damaging your model. Moving right along to the right, we have our recommended tool section. Here they recommend some wire cutters, some tweezers, and needle nose pliers. Now groovers, I definitely recommend a good set of wire cutters because those are really useful for cutting out all of our pieces while we're building. You want to make sure all the little pieces of metal are taken off of all your pieces as well, because if any of the small little bits of metal remain, they might get in the way of you bending the piece correctly. So always try to go as close as you can to the piece's edge to make sure all the metal comes off. A good set of wire cutters will help you with that. Now the next thing they recommend is a good set of tweezers, and for this particular build I definitely recommend a really strong set of tweezers. They don't necessarily have to be detailed tweezers, but a strong set of tweezers will go a long way with this build. Lastly, the needle nose pliers are really good for helping you form long pieces like the barrels and some other parts of the ship. But for most, including myself, tweezers are always my primary weapon. Next, we go down to our two metal sheets, where we see all of our parts and a whole bunch of numbers and colors. Now, our two metal sheets here, I personally orientate my metal to these two pictures. That just helps me be able to find my parts a lot easier when I need to find them. Now, all of the colors here relate to similar pieces, so all the yellow ones are all the same, all the purple ones are the same, and so on. All the numbers here indicate part numbers, so when you're looking at the building instructions and they're requesting for, say, part number 1, you want to look for where 1 is and where the red line goes to. This indicates to you on the metal where the first part is. And after that, you pretty much rinse and repeat. Or should I say, fold, bend, and twist yourself a new Rebel Snowspeeder. I think that pretty much sums up our instructions there, R2. Did I miss anything? Well then, okay, I think it's time for us to start talking about this little ship. The Snowspeeder, as we know it, is really a modified version of what is called the T-47 Airspeeder. The T-47 has been modified a few times to help the Rebels in different climates, mainly in the heat. The cold climate on Hoth was really hard on the Airspeeder that was originally made just for industrial cargo runs. But the Rebel engineers persevered and were able to make some clever modifications to make this the ultimate AT-AT fighting machine. The Snowspeeder itself is a two-person craft with a pilot and a rear-facing tail gunner. The tail gunner sits where the cargo used to go. The little speeder has two heavy forward-facing laser cannons and a harpoon cannon placed in front of the tail gunner. During the Battle of Hoth, these snowspeeders used tow cables to try and disable the AT-ATs by firing the tow cable at its legs. Once attached, the snowspeeder would then fly in low circles around the AT-AT's legs. If this tricky little maneuver was done just right, the team would basically hog-tie themselves an AT-AT, which I think is pretty awesome. After the Battle of Hoth, the Snowspeeder became one of the Rebel Alliance's most prized weapons because of their success at taking down AT-ATs. They are really the only vehicles that pose any direct threat to the AT-ATs so far in the Star Wars universe. You won't be seeing these guys in space, however, because they are 100% a low-altitude vehicle, meaning they're planet-bound.
Watch out, men! This is Rebel territory. Keep your eyes peeled. What was that, sir? I think that was a Rebel Snowspeeder. Keep your eyes out, gentlemen. Keep them peeled. Here it comes, sir. Take aim. Fire, gentlemen. Fire. Fire. R2-D2 must have been playing with the voice modulator chips again. Not very frightening for my AT-AT friend, but our little Rebel Snowspeeder here was quite the little build. Let's talk about it a little bit more in construction. My first point when it comes to building the Star Wars Snowspeeder from Metal Earth is there are a lot of parts here to shape, form, and connect together. In Groovers, I really recommend taking your time doing this. And I know I've said that in the past about a few other models, but with this one in particular, you really do want to take your time to form every one of these pieces correctly. Because when you're putting everything on at the end, there's a lot of possibilities that things might not line up because of how you bent them. Now at the end of your build, you can definitely go over everything and straighten them all up like I did here, but Groovers, with this particular build, I can't stress it enough, take your time, and if you feel frustrated, walk away from the build and come back to it. You'll thank yourself in the end. My second point is to make sure you have a really good set of tweezers on hand. Not necessarily detailed tweezers, but a really strong set that will help you form and shape all the pieces that you need, as well as help you connect some of these pieces really tightly together, like our little vents here at the back. You'll notice that mine kind of shake around a little bit. That's because the tweezers that I use weren't necessarily the greatest for grabbing all of the tab. If you get some better tweezers out there, you can take as much of the tab as possible in them and then twist them, and that should prevent the little back grills there from shaking around. My third and final point when it comes to building the Star Wars Snowspeeder is more of a mention of a modification that I've been doing to a lot of my builds, which is adding magnets to them. So with this particular build, I went ahead and added magnets on the inside, and that allows me to put my little stand here on the bottom when I want it there, and of course I can always take it off when I don't, so I can have some fun with it around my office if I wish, or I can also just have it displayed nice and promptly like that. Very nice modification, very easy to do, and something that I would love to see more of in the future. With that being said, Groove Builders, let's move on to build time. The Star Wars Snowspeeder took me about 5 hours to build, and I think it could have taken me a little less time, but Groovers, like I said in my first point, you really want to take your time to go through and form all these pieces correctly and then go back over at the end to make sure everything lines up nicely. Now, I did get a new camera, so I was playing a lot with the settings during this particular build, so that could have also added to the time, but I think on average 5 hours is a pretty good length to build the Star Wars Snowspeeder. And finally, Groove Builders, my thoughts. The Star Wars Rebel Snowspeeder from Metal Earth is a very interestingly complicated little design. And I think because of its design, we have so many different problems when building it. I see a lot of people, especially over at the Reddit forums, commenting on how hard it is to get these barrels to line up properly, and also about how the whole thing kind of connects together. And you know what? I kind of agree with you. There's definitely some interesting design choices that they chose to implement here that, if you ask me, could be redesigned and made a little bit easier for the guys at home. Now, I think it's funny sometimes that we complain about builds being too easy, and then we get a build like this and we go, man, I mean, we could have built this a little bit better, or we could design it a little bit better. So I think maybe there's maybe a section of us out there that will never really be happy. But this little guy here does have some interesting aspects to it. I mean, the back here is totally reliant on you, the builder, to make sure you have a really good tight connection to get that nice little grill. Now, mine didn't turn out the greatest, like I talked about earlier, and that's because the tweezers I have don't really grab as much of the metal as I thought they did. But it's through builds like this that we learn that our tools sometimes need to be upgraded. Which, Groovers, I think in the future I'm going to be doing a video on tools, because there are so many tools out there to help you build these little metal models. At the end of the day, I will definitely say this is one of the harder Star Wars ships to build. And if you're looking for something a little bit more challenging, I would definitely look at this little guide to give you that run for your money. But if you're new to metal model building, I know how much you might like this ship, I would really recommend staying away from it. You're definitely more likely to break apart on this particular ship than any other in the Star Wars series that we've built so far. Alright, Groove Builders, that brings us to the end. I had a really good time building the Rebel Star Wars Snowspeeder with you, and if you guys had a good time, don't forget to press that like button. For more videos like this, hit subscribe as well, as we got all kinds of really cool content coming out in the future. Until next time, Groove Builders, keep building. Now, I gotta go change out that voice modulator chip in that AT-AT. Cat, for goodness sake.